Hello, listeners and viewers. Welcome to an English version of Futucast. My name is still William von der Palen, even in English, and this is Isak Rautio.
Yeah.
And today
we don't do these in English that often, but we do them for good reasons every now and again.
Yeah, today is definitely a good reason. We're at a very special place. And
I have a pineapple here.
You have a pineapple. And for everyone listening in on audio, you should definitely check out the video version of this. We have some cool props on the table, and the whole space is pretty special. And the reason we're here is that we're talking to two really interesting people today. We have Brittany Kaiser and Vesa. So welcome to Futucast.
Thank you so much for having us. Pleasure to meet you guys.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the show, so it's a real treat.
Yeah, thanks for making this happen, kind of, Vesa. It hasn't been me that's been talking to you. It's been William mostly, but yeah, this is amazing. I don't think, we'll introduce you soon, but Brittany, people know you probably from a lot of stuff. Mainly, you're the main, what would you call it? Would you say whistleblower?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah, the legal term.
That's the legal, yeah. It is an official legal term,
yes.
Whistleblower. Okay. For Cambridge Analytica, that happened a while ago. We'll get into that later. And then you, Vesa, you're an artist, like a digital artist here in Finland. This is your studio that we're in right now. Am I allowed to say that, actually?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
We're somewhere in Finland. And
somewhere. It's called the Portal. So
somewhere in the
somewhere.
portal. Yes.
It's like how the Great Hack opened up somewhere in Thailand.
Yes. That's true. Yeah, and we met with Vesa actually only a few weeks ago. So it was very spontaneous, this whole thing. We've been connected on LinkedIn for a while, and then I just sent you a message. I was bored one night and asked you for coffee. And then we went for coffee the next day. And then this whole thing came up. I've been interested in the blockchain space and NFTs for a while now. And it was interesting to hear someone who's actually doing something in that space. And then we decided to come check out the space. And as an added bonus, we'll be doing this podcast now also with you both. So super great to have you here. But maybe we can start off just with you, Brittany. What have you been up to since Cambridge Analytica? We'll dive into a brief introduction of Cambridge Analytica, but I'm sure quite many people are familiar with that.
Of course. What a lot of people don't know is that I actually left Cambridge Analytica to work full-time in blockchain technology. I had been interested in it for a very long time. I was lucky enough to have a friend that was mining Bitcoin in 2011 and sent me my first Bitcoins back then. So I always was paying attention to the industry and learning about it. And while I was at Cambridge and started to see how disastrous the data industry actually was, I started to think that my time was better spent working on large-scale encryption, privacy, and data protection technologies. So I left a place where I believe most people know it as a company that was exploiting data. If you know much about the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, the main problem is that the amount of data that exists about all of us around the world on open markets to purchase, to license, and to be used for purposes that we never agreed to in the first place, that is a technical infrastructure issue. It's actually how data is managed, and it's impossible for us to track and trace it. It's not permissioned. We can't easily delete it. We can't see where it is lying in millions of databases around the world, and we have no control over that when we're using traditional technology. So I've spent the past many years working on not just growing blockchain technology itself, but also working on the legal and regulatory issues around that. I spent a lot of time doing legislative drafting, so writing and helping pass laws that deal with not just blockchain technology, but privacy and data protection and what that actually looks like in order to implement. So making sure that both technology and legislation starts to actually make sense in a way where it protects people. My background is a training in human rights law, so I was studying as a human rights lawyer for nearly a decade. And so for me, if you want to think about data rights as human rights, something that needs to be fundamentally protected, we need both legislative protections as well as large-scale encryption technologies like blockchain, where you can actually know for sure that if you're using a phone, if you're using a computer, logging into any platform, that your information is not going anywhere or being shared with people unless you agreed to it.
Yeah, the Cambridge Analytica thing, and just the usage of data, it's a global thing. It's happening everywhere. It's just Cambridge Analytica, we know about it because it's a singular instance that changed the course of history in many ways, in very, very significant ways. But as you said, it's not just an isolated case. But should we just jump into that then? What was Cambridge Analytica and what happened?
Of course. So Cambridge Analytica was a tech startup that I started working at part-time while I was doing my PhD in international human rights law. And that probably to a lot of people sounds like a cognitive dissonance. How are you doing both of those things at the same time? But I come from a background of using technology for activism. I was on the first Obama campaign team where we invented social media strategy. And what I always saw was that if you could use more data in your political campaigning, in your activism, then you were going to be more successful.
There was a big insight of the Obama campaign in 2008, right? The first time
Yes.
ever.
Yeah, I was studying at Edinburgh University and I found out that Barack Obama was running for president, and I had already volunteered on his senatorial campaign. I'm from Chicago, so I had known him since he was a young state senator, and I left Edinburgh, flew back to the United States, and joined the headquarters team when it was only about 5 or 6 people, and created his Facebook page.
You did?
Yeah.
Really? Wow.
So in the very beginning of data and politics, for me, I was actually very inspired at the intersection between politics and technology. And so when I joined Cambridge, I had spent many years after the Obama campaign teaching NGOs, charities, United Nations departments how to use the types of technologies that we developed on the Obama campaign so that they could be more successful in whatever they were trying to do, fundraise for a cause or pass a new law to protect people, whatever it was. And I saw Cambridge Analytica as the most sophisticated way to learn how to use these technologies, that they were the best in the business globally. And if I could get a job there, then I could learn how to be the best campaigner in the world, right? And that's how I saw it. So while I was studying, I joined this company, and I started to learn very quickly that it was quite a lot farther than what we had developed on the Obama campaign. There were tons of top data scientists that were collecting data in ways that were, not exactly straightforward. I think the big story that hit the papers was, Cambridge Analytica was one of the companies that got access to what was called the Friends API on Facebook. So from 2010 to 2015, there was an API that if you signed up to be a developer on Facebook, you could join the developers program and gain access to building an app on Facebook. Yeah. And when you built an app, if anyone decided to consent to using the app, they not just consented to give their own data, but they were technically allowing access to data of everyone in their network. So their family, their friends, everybody that they were connected with on Facebook, all of a sudden, the developers of that application had access to everyone else's personal data, which under any law around the world, you can't consent on behalf of another able-bodied adult.
And to put it into perspective, the numbers are crazy. Like the people who gave consent, they were in the 27,000 or something, and that number. But then the aggregate amount of data of how many people they collected data from was like 50 million.
Well, I mean, at minimum, I would.
Minimum, yeah.
But it's like you can get to anyone in the world with, a few connections already now. So multiply that with from 27,000 people, it's bound to be quite a big number quite quickly.
Well, that's the thing. It very quickly turns into a web of connectivity to anyone that had a Facebook page before April 2015 when they supposedly shut off access to this API. And Cambridge Analytica is one of 40,000 companies that had access to it.
Wow.
So you think about Cambridge Analytica blowing up and it was this small tech startup. Think about all of the other companies who actually had access to this, who perhaps didn't have incredibly public and controversial clients like Donald Trump. So the problem was much greater than what Cambridge Analytica was doing with it, but it was the example that got set on the need for reform on data protection and privacy globally.
Right. Yeah. And Vesa, you've been doing some really interesting stuff also for a long time already, and kind of now recently also even more exploded onto the scene with the rise of NFTs and all this kind of hype around that as well. So do you want to tell the listeners briefly what you've done? You haven't been at Cambridge Analytica as far as I'm concerned, but how did you end up meeting, and also what are you doing together here?
Well, my sort of thing and why I'm so privileged to be sitting here with Brittany is that this is like almost the second time I'm able to capture lightning in a bottle, because back in 2008 I came up with my own process of how to make art, which is through body painting and photography and painting and throwing it all together with Photoshop. Then I kind of started having digital files as the original artworks. And back in 2013, we published this art project with Veena Malik, who is this Bollywood actress who had a very controversial backstory. And we did these 6 artworks that commented upon the common origin of all spirituality all across the world. And she's Muslim and Pakistani. So for her to fly to Finland to do these body painting pieces was quite something. And I thought, how am I ever going to find another story like that in my life? So, and as we're about to do a podcast of our own to go deeper into the NFTs and digital art and all this kind of thing, I'm just happy to be here in a sort of supportive role to fill in with some interesting facts that I think are sort of essential about this story and why we're doing this collaboration together. So that's really the reason I'm sitting here. But it's such a fantastic thing from where to get inspiration from. And we have this virtual reality expert here called Frank Spalteholz, we're using eight GoPro cameras and virtual reality capture and video capture and all this kind of stuff to really push and test the limits of how far we can take this with NFTs.
Yeah, I think it's super cool how, art evolves with technology or even makes technology evolve. And, what we define as art keeps continuing or keeps changing over time. So I've seen some of your work already, and I think I've heard some of your upcoming visions as well. So we're looking forward to doing also an episode with you on this technology.
Yeah, we're surrounded by it here.
Yeah. We don't know that much about this kind of stuff, but coming into this space already was pretty. It's a pretty far stretch from going, for instance, into a traditional museum. So I mean, that's already cool that art can be so different in many ways. But yeah, maybe many people know the Cambridge Analytica story and what then ended up happening. But what I thought before this interview that would be really interesting to know is that how bad of a problem is this still? I mean, as you said, there were 40,000 companies that had access to this API, and I'm sure there's, the problem wasn't solved with Cambridge Analytica going out of business. It's probably still a problem, right?
Right. And it's not just Cambridge Analytica and those 40,000 companies who had access to Facebook. And unfortunately, it's not just Facebook either. It's the way that legacy technologies have been built. Over the past many decades, technology was developed in order to be inherently extractive. So every time any of us touch technology, it's taking as much time, attention, and value and personal information about us as possible and collecting that on databases around the world to be modeled and used for anything from advertising to developing better products to informing governments, so whatever it happens to be. The way that technology inherently is built is to make sure that the user is the product in the end. And so the reason why I call it legacy technologies is because I don't believe that that's the way that technology is going to continue to be allowed to work in the future. Already, as we're talking about blockchain technologies, encryption, NFTs, the rise of the need for data protection, for privacy by design technologies is bringing about this massive influx of, I suppose, funding and investment into blockchain technology, which right now is the most reliable form of encryption for being able to protect data, to make sure that data is permissioned, it's trackable and traceable. It cannot be easily manipulated by a centralized power. That was another part of the Cambridge Analytica Facebook scandal, where both of these companies could easily delete information about how data was used or where it went.
Yeah.
Blockchain technology doesn't enable an individual company or individual person to be able to mass delete. You can always see what has happened. And trackable and traceable data transactions, I suppose, bring so much transparency, bring so much accountability, that that's really where we're seeing like a huge movement for technology to go, which is that if I, as an individual, am going to pick up a phone or open my computer, that my information would only be shared with my government or with companies if I have explicitly consented to. And so since GDPR was enacted, that has become much more mainstream in Europe, especially, or with companies that do business in Europe, where they are starting to tell you, hey, we're going to collect your data, but we're going to give you some options. Are you happy for us to share it with these companies? Are you happy for us to use these types of tracking cookies or not? And you're starting to be able to toggle on and off and decide how you feel about that. So that's kind of like the basic next step of data protection. But really, because this problem is a global problem of the way that technology infrastructure works, I think we have quite a few more steps to really getting to the point where we could say that we have full control over our information. And that's everything from being able to have a digital identity where we're never sharing our personal information. We're actually just able to verify we are who we say we are without ever sharing our first name, last name, address, financial information. Like that would never get shared or be in databases around the world. And we're starting to get there. We're really starting to get there. And I think our children aren't going to be in a situation where their data is in millions of databases around the world being used to target them either for political purposes or for advertising, unless they have chosen for that to happen. And so I suppose we're at this really interesting period of time where you see Mark Zuckerberg on trial in Congress, and where you see the blockchain industry now being worth trillions and trillions of dollars as the most popular new form of encryption technology. And we're seeing this seismic shift. But the size of the problem is still so great that we're going to have to see, tens of trillions of dollars in the blockchain industry before you're going to think that multinational corporations and governments will be fully, running on encrypted technologies or blockchain. But we're getting there. We're getting there.
You said it's a seismic shift. Do you think it's kind of an arms race of a sort between these two schools of thought?
It's funny that you call it that.
Yeah.
Because Alexander Nix, the CEO of Cambridge Analytica, used to always say that the data industry was an arms race.
Yeah.
And that the more powerful you became depended on how much data you collected. And, he was exactly right. The world's most powerful companies are valued upon how much of our data they possess, from Google, Facebook, Uber, et cetera, and so forth.
Yeah.
The entire value of the companies is that they have so much data that they can target anyone with any sort of product and be incredibly successful. That's the entire business model. And so, the arms race now is, can we as individuals actually demand our data be protected? What are the steps to do that? And I think you're seeing in governments around the world, where the movement started in Europe, where the government is saying, okay, we need to actually do better to protect citizens. So we're going to start with some laws that say that companies can't continue to act the way that Facebook has, the way that Cambridge Analytica business models were based off of. You can't just endlessly collect information from people and use it for literally any purpose at all, from, inciting violence to undermining, people's democratic process and their relationship with their government, because that's that's, it goes even further than that. I mean, you can see Facebook being accused of crimes against humanity in certain countries. It goes that far, the level of the problem. So the arms race now is really new technologies versus legacy technologies. And, I think the new technologies are starting to win.
Yeah.
There's something quite interesting because and the story is ever evolving as well, because now that Mr. Zuckerberg has announced the whole meta transition and all that kind of stuff, is what foundationally the NFT and blockchain and what it makes possible is the digital land ownership and avatar sneakers. You can do just about anything. And what it really leads to is that I'm pretty sure that Meta won't give any of the land ownership rights or whatever that is actually important about the metaverse. So their sort of business model and the centralized business model is ever evolving, and people are kind of really excited about the 3 billion users that Facebook has. But what's actually important about this whole innovation and a part of our story of what we're telling here is the 3.5 billion people without a bank account in the world. And what they're going to be able to do with digital land ownership is that they're going to make new economies, essentially. And even if you don't have a bank account because of the archaic financial system, now with blockchain innovations, even in remote villages in Africa, people have mobile phones, essentially putting a bank onto their mobile phone. And what that leads to is that perhaps the bottom of the financial sort of world will be able to start doing digital innovation and trade, therefore elevating it. And what that leads to counterintuitively, which I thought was just a mind-blowing thing, is that once this elevation starts to happen, we also know that those societies that are doing the best take care of their environment the best. So counterintuitively, the virtual reality assets might actually end up solving a lot of the physical problems that we have in our world. And that's why it's so important to campaign towards all of this data ownership and for people to understand that, no, don't give all to Mark. Yeah. Maybe have some for yourself, and maybe that's the way to solve a lot of the problems.
You don't believe the hype in the product? I watched the whole thing, the 1 hour, 20 minutes.
I think they don't get it, to be honest. Yeah. Like, I don't think
it's not in their incentive structure to get it.
Exactly.
Right. Therefore, we're speaking out.
To build a decentralized metaverse that everyone can use. Yeah. I mean, that's the most powerful tool ever if they manage to create it and lure everyone in, because then if they're able now to connect your data on the web, imagine how easy it is to collect everything you do in the metaverse, because basically everything you do will leave a footprint. Here in the real world, theoretically you can leave your phone at home and you can go dark if you want to. Theoretically, yeah.
And things have gotten pretty bizarre here in the real world lately as well. So
yes, that's true.
I think really the main way to think about it is that right now, your phone is spyware in your pocket, that it follows you around everywhere, and it's specifically there to collect as much information about you as possible that then gets monetized off the back of you, but not to empower you. And so while that's the way that technology works right now, if you start to use decentralized technologies, if you start to use blockchain encryption, you are only sharing data when you have chosen to, and you are rewarded for that. So there's an actual incentive structure for you to share your time and your attention with different blockchain platforms. And so when you do that, you start to get paid. You start to earn exponential value instead of just the companies who built the platform taking all of the value from you. And that's that shift. It's not just giving people a bank account. It's explaining to every individual around the world that we are inherently valuable and that our time and attention has obviously quite a lot of value if companies worth $1 trillion are just made up of our personal data, right? It's a product that collects data, and that's why it's valuable. So if we start to actually earn a percentage of that value, could be a small percentage. Say we owned 10 or 20% of the value of our data that we give to Facebook alone. That would be enough money to change the lives of billions of people around the world. And it's why I've never been, even as a whistleblower and testifying against Mark Zuckerberg, I never have been a #delete Facebook person. I've thought, okay, if this company has billions of users and they just decide to let people own their data and pay them like a small percentage of how they monetize everyone's information, that would probably mean that those billions of people that live on less than $2 a day but happen to have a Facebook account could probably buy their groceries with their Facebook data money.
Yeah, they would have an asset, something to monetize for the first time. I think one thing we got inherently wrong when building the social platforms. I think it's also important to remember that they've been basically built. The biggest ones have been built in less than 15 years now, and there was never really any choice. So they came up with a business model that was based on data, and basically it was the investors in these companies that came up with the business model. As far as I've understood it, it's not like Mark Zuckerberg at first was thinking, how can I exploit 3 billion people in the world and extract all the data they have? But it kind of ended up happening, and the big problem there is that since we can't live without the products anymore, it's not like it's framed as a choice. That, okay, if you're so worried about the data, don't use the products, but you can't escape the product anymore. Why is it their choice to pay for the product and not give away your data? I mean, that's like, I would happily pay Facebook $20 or $50 a month to use WhatsApp, Instagram, everything like that.
50?
Yeah, and not give away my data. But there was an interesting survey that was made that people, to stop using WhatsApp and Instagram, would like to receive $500 a month to stop using the services. So, I mean, it's backwards. We would pay, like, it's and that's the problem. I mean, if the business model gave us a choice from the get-go, I think it should be made law that you can't, as a company, you have to give the consumer a choice, either or. You can pay with your data or you can pay with money. But at the moment, you don't have any choice, and you don't have a real choice not to use the product, and it's strange.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely no choice. I mean, even if you don't have a Facebook account, Facebook has what's called a shadow profile on you. So if you've never made an account, they still collect data about you. And they collect it through the people that you sit next to, the people you work with, the people you communicate with. And so should you ever turn an account online, they already know enough about you to monetize your account. Should you never turn an account online, they can still monetize your information without you ever setting up your own account. So the choice is not there.
How is that kept? How's that registered in the database? Is it
Shadow
just
Isaac?
Just Shadow Isaac?
Well, I mean, everything from your what they would consider your digital ID, your Facebook identifier, even without your account, which would include everything from your name to your live locations to what you purchase to who you communicate with, what your interests are. It's not altogether too dissimilar from the information they would have on you if you actually had an account, which is shocking to a lot of people that think that they've done something good by deleting their Facebook account or by never having one. They're super proud of themselves, but the problem is it's become more dystopian than that. And just not having an account doesn't mean that you are protected from the way that the company actually uses your information. And I think that's where we can start to understand the gravity of the problem here and why it's probably impossible for us to take back all of our data that's already out there. I'm really talking about kind of a revolution in our thinking of all of the data we produce from here into the future. So the next generation doesn't have this issue. And so that all of the data that we produce starting now can be protected. And our historic data, it's out there. This is what unfortunately we've allowed to happen by never reading the terms and conditions and choosing convenience over our own choice, basically.
Even then, I tried to read it once, or I tried to read one once. I forget where it was, but it's veiled in legal language that gets not only tiring to read, but a struggle to understand at any level. So even the reading choice isn't as good as.
It's a legal design issue, basically. Yeah. It's not designed for the user to understand in the first place. So
I think you guys have probably seen the film The Social Dilemma.
Yeah.
maybe.
Yes.
Yeah. And so my friend Joe Toscano, who's in that, he left Google for ethical reasons because he's a design expert and they were asking him to design things that were actually tricking people into giving away more data than they expected. And so that was part of his interviews on The Social Dilemma. He explains that, but now he has specifically worked on easy to understand terms and conditions where companies can like drag and drop single like first grade reading level bullet points of like, this is what we would like to collect, yes or no.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do with it, yes or no. This is who it's going to be shared with, yes or no. And even if you say no to everything, you can still use the product, which right now is not possible with most products. I mean, you need a legal team to sit there with you to read the terms and conditions for you to fully understand what you're giving away. And even then, should you choose to opt out, you can't actually continue and download the app, right? So we're in a weird situation where it's all or nothing. Like you either download the app and give all of this stuff away, or you choose not to use it at all. And companies like Facebook still collect your data even if you never download it.
Well, I think that's the most crazy. That's the craziest part. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But in that situation where you have you would have an easy to understand terms of service, and then you choose not to go along with it. Then if you had like, okay, pay a monthly fee, I think many people would do that. And then,
I read a survey, this might not be legit, I don't know what the sample size was and everything, but people were on average willing to pay $4 a month on average.
Like Instagram or Facebook.
Yeah.
And
In
to be
exchange.
paid 500 not to use them.
That doesn't really make sense.
Quite a big gap there.
Because there's a couple of really interesting things that I think, and this relates to the sort of art side of things of what we can do here, is that, how do you legislate against a problem that is in the human psyche, like, let's say, the witch hunts, which could be called the cancel culture now, in certain ways, is that, art can contribute in one way, or what we're trying to discover is those pressure points of what is not being discussed, what is hard to put into legislation, what is hard, like, for example, if... like what you were saying about the numbers of how things work, that people aren't willing to sort of do the economic calculation of what it costs for them to participate or do things like that. And that's why I think the blockchain thing as an underneath layer, why it was such a revelation, is that as a sort of money activist for some time, understanding how money comes into existence was one thing, but there was no positive direction for it. So once blockchain came along, then it also became an economic education for someone as unlikely as me to be interested in money on such a foundational level. And I think a part of the problem is that most people don't really understand what money is. Most people know what money does, but they don't know what it is. And that is the thing that you need to understand, on top of which everything else is then built. And then all of a sudden you might figure out that something that you're getting for free then has to evolve into something that takes something from you that you might not agree to. So it's an economic education issue as well on a global scale.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how technology these days amplifies a lot of these human things. Like even data and algorithms are revealing so much about psychology and how the free will, just the free will is a general concept, however you want to talk about it. But if we talk about algorithms for a moment, could it be said that Cambridge Analytica basically was doing something that has always been attempted to be done in campaigning and communications and everything else, just much, much, much more effectively?
Definitely. I think, the model that Cambridge Analytica was using was really just traditional marketing, data-driven marketing and advertising on steroids, which is to say that if you are trying to sell a product to people, you can use data-driven technologies in a less precise way. You can collect less data and still sell plenty of products just by, narrowing your audiences and having perhaps, edited messages for different groups of people. You will still be a successful company because you will still sell some products. And the more you crank up the dial of how intense you get with your data-driven messaging, the more ROI you're going to see, for example. Now, that doesn't work in politics. It's in all or nothing. right?
Either you vote or you don't vote. Yeah.
You either win an election or you don't. So there's not this, okay, we're going to use a little bit of data, we're going to do some targeted messaging, and we're still going to sell to enough of the population to be a decent business. No. You have to know that there's a minimum percentage of the population that you are, quote unquote, selling to, that you are convincing of yourself, your brand, you as a politician. You have to sell to that amount of people or you lose. The entire investment's gone, the company folds. So the way that, people at Cambridge used to phrase campaigns is that it's like creating a unicorn startup within a year and using all the funds and shutting down the startup at the end. But you either succeed or you fail.
Yeah, it's very binary.
Nothing in between.
Yeah.
Which is,
lowers the threshold maybe in a certain environment to do stuff.
It basically means that there is more innovation in how technology is used in politics than even in business, because it is so cutthroat. It is that all or nothing. So it's try everything you possibly can in order to convince those extra people to show up to vote and to vote for you, right? And so that's why some of the stuff that I saw happening at Cambridge Analytica was, you might consider it unethical, but really was the bleeding edge of what you could possibly do with technology. So instead of, running a campaign to, five different groups of people, which a typical campaign might do between 3 and 6 different campaigns, the Trump campaign did 10,000 campaigns, right? To very specific groups of people. And all of that was algorithm driven, as you mentioned, that, these algorithms are completely changing our reality and our psychology. But if you have algorithms that are completely deciding everything you see, your entire reality online, everything on your phone is different than the person next to you, tailored specifically for you. If you're able to drill down to the individual level, then you're campaigning and speaking to everybody individually as they need to hear a message to be convinced of whatever you're saying. So
yeah, perfect candidate suddenly for everyone.
You're the perfect candidate for everyone, even if, all of a sudden you have 10 policies on one topic.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where it starts to get very questionable.
Yeah, that's the problem. You basically lie to 9 people, or you can lie even to 10 people at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's maybe a point where we should be regulating that. Mm-hmm. I mean, you should still objectively be telling some kinds of truth in your advertising, in your political advertising.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't be allowed to lie, but of course that then opens a new can of worms, what's lying and all that kind of stuff. But
absolutely.
But is it weird, like how algorithms kind of like hijacking your sense-making mechanism in the sense that like the strata or whatever layer of reality that you're always making sense of when you're perceiving it, that is being perpetually self-referential in a way. Like it keeps getting modified according to how you relate to it, which it's not how we interact with the normal world usually.
Yeah,
and it
absolutely.
completely messes up with how we understand everything.
But plus also there's many, like following the political discussion, is that's when I kind of saw the first documentaries about how the monetary system works in 2006. It was why I started. I never wanted to be an activist of sorts, and I still have sort of a questionable relationship with the term itself, because a certain amount of blindness is associated with that kind of thinking. But it was obvious to see that unless if we fix this foundational layer, then the polarization that we see today is going to happen. So many people think that it's a right or a left issue, or it's let's say a polarization economically issue, but it's more like. It's just that the worse that people do, the more they're going to blame each other and be at each other's throats. So when you get to the foundational layer of all of this, how to own your data, how to start utilizing new technology at the face of a system that is kind of crumbling, then all of a sudden you start to see your neighbor as someone you can collaborate with, as opposed to try and. So in one way, what the whole process of what we're doing here is to try and find those pressure points and go to the foundation layers, inspire people to get So get that information so that some of this thing can start to go back on its rails, and the maybe middle class even will start to expand as opposed to detract, because that's the thing that keeps it all together. And we're in dire straits right now, so in so many ways. So
I think it's a beautiful idea, and I'm very close to it myself. So to try to be the devil's advocate for once, what do you see is like, how can that fail? Because it's a grand project, getting the big established, governmental players, central banks, everyone to agree that it's better to give power to the people, so to say, and just skip these. Or if not skip these institutions, then at least modify them quite heavily from what they're doing today.
So in my opinion, it's not about convincing those organizations of anything. It's about being more successful than they are with exercising a completely new model. I think that the rise of Bitcoin has shown that as like the first example of something where a government can't ban it and you can't legislate against it because it's impossible to stop on a technical basis. You cannot stop Bitcoin from functioning.
China's a good example of that.
Exactly. And unless the entire world's internet and electricity went down, Bitcoin is still functioning, right? And so without nuclear war, Bitcoin is there, and it has become increasingly popular to the point where it became stupid for large institutions and governments to pretend like it wasn't important, or that it wasn't a legitimate asset class, a legitimate form of money or value transfer. And so now you've seen that most governments around the world have started to make legislation that regulates it in some way as opposed to banning it, because it's not, again, possible to ban it. And then secondly, you're seeing large-scale institutions like banks that used to say, like, Bitcoin is just for criminals, and now it's one of their largest new asset classes in their portfolios for their investment clients. And now you're starting to see big brands and companies around the world that may have never interacted with blockchain. Now their biggest new revenue source is NFTs, which is using blockchain tokens, whether or not it's based on Bitcoin or another blockchain basis. These are companies and institutions and governments that have to accept it because it is popular, it's being used, and it is inevitable. From I think both of our perspectives, we would say that the technology is proving itself. We don't have to convince anyone of anything. Companies, governments, any organizations are going to be left behind should they choose not to adopt these technologies. And that's really where I think a lot of the activism came from in the beginning of the industry, which is once people and organizations start to understand how these technologies work, they're going to have to adopt them. It's just getting to that kind of tipping point of mass adoption, and the coronavirus shutdown drove us to that, where, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people around the world all of a sudden lost any sort of knowledge of where their next paycheck was coming from. And we were forced to lead a completely digital life. So all of a sudden, people were looking for ways to earn and create value online in the digital space. And the only way to own your value and know that you are actually going to be compensated is to use blockchain technology in your digital life.
And what is courage as currency? I mean, that's what's so incredibly inspiring about being able to do this collaboration with Brittany, is like seeing the emotional journey, like having actually listened to the book Targeted and kind of getting to know you personally,
Great book.
And just knowing the journey that you've been on from, this goodwill and a certain amount of naivety, I suppose, as we all start out with, then coming to terms and then claiming your own data, is that I think this is so important, is for people to understand that, we all start from a place of, we didn't know, and then it's scary, and it's like this huge machine that we're sort of all in a spider's web with. But you can just actively do courage in the day-to-day, in whatever form that takes for you. And then we have examples like yourself who to follow, even in small increments, of how to start doing things that are of benefit to you, and sometimes it's a healthy amount of just saying no to some things. I won't accept this anymore, and that I think is a gigantic shift internally on any individual, and that sort of starts the ball rolling in a bigger scale as well.
Well, for right now, you still have to be an activist in your own life to use privacy technologies. You have to say, hey, I'm going to actively go out of my way and not use WhatsApp or Facebook, and I'm going to force people to text me on Signal, or I'm going to find a way to still get invited to parties even though I don't have a Facebook account, or whatever it happens to be. Like, you have to go out of your way because it's not the norm. But I think the point of where this shift is going is that this is going to be something that people don't need to like fight to accomplish. Like, I think one of the easiest ways to land the plane of like where this is going is once your phone is fully running on blockchain technology and your computer and everything that you touch, you're not going to have to think about it, because just like you don't think about how your iOS or your Windows or your Android functions, you're not going to think about how that technology is working on a day-to-day basis, and you'll basically have more like an Airbnb model. So if you own your data like you own your house, which it's increasingly starting to be considered an intangible personal property, your digital assets, then think about it like the Airbnb model. So if someone wants to get access to your house on Airbnb, they tell you who they are, how long they want to use it for, and you agree on a price before you hand away the keys. So as you're going through your terms and conditions, signing up for your phone, downloading an app, you can say, okay, I'm happy to share my data for 1 year for marketing purposes, but not for political purposes. And, hey, I'll take 20% for that.
Yeah, but existentially will feel the same, kind of, because everything's happening in the background. It will feel exactly the same.
Important as well.
Yeah. Because it tells something about how insidious the situation right now is. Also, like how it doesn't feel like anything that your data is being used in every which way.
You don't feel it. You don't. Most people don't get hurt by sharing their data like explicitly. But I hope that in maybe 20 years we'll look back at these past 20 years and see them as one of the biggest arbitrage opportunities ever for these companies. That they basically leverage our data without or with our consent. We didn't get it, and once we get it, we kind of shut that off. And I hope that's what's happening, and we'll see.
Well,
if we'll get
for
there.
me to make it clear, I'm not a privacy campaigner. I don't believe that we should just shut off all of our data and not give access to it.
It is great.
I in fact believe that we should share as much data as possible, but we should share it safely and anonymously and consensually.
Yeah.
And where it's being monetized, where those opportunities are, that monetization opportunity needs to be shared with us. Yeah. It's not just for the company that built the platform. They obviously get to take a percentage of it, but because it's our information, we get a percentage of it as well. So I really see you logging into your phone, into your digital wallet, which some of these technologies exist today. You just have to decide to use them. But you log in and you see, okay, well, I could decide to share my healthcare data with this healthcare researcher today. I could decide to share the data about how I'm driving my car with, my local smart cities data provider. I could share this, and that, and you are just rewarded. So just for existing and having a phone, you are getting paid. Just for choosing to share information with organizations that could use it for different purposes, you have enough money to at least take care of yourself and your family, even if you don't do anything else in life.
Yeah.
So you might see it as a universal income.
Yeah. No, that's at least the base of it.
Couldn't you even see the opportunity there for kind of data brokerages or curators in that sense? Like if there are some people who just don't want to deal with that, and then there's some agent or some company who's trustworthy and
curates the buyers and then also curates the data maybe a bit more. It's anonymous, but they would make it searchable and then sell to not the highest bidders, but you could have an opt-in who you want to sell. You don't want to sell to big pharma. Okay, don't sell to big pharma. You can sell to researchers. You can sell for a bigger price for a smaller price. You could set all those ranges. So
those companies already exist. Big Token, Permission.io, Brave Browser, Rainfall, Crown Sterling. I could go on and on.
Yeah.
Those business models exist. It's just there's millions of users instead of billions of users. But I think once people realize, like, hey, I could use this application and get paid for my time, or I could use Facebook and continue receiving fake news on my news feed and paying the investors from this company without ever seeing a dime in return. Okay, well, then that's everyone's personal choice for now.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a pretty easy choice to make once people really understand the difference.
For sure. Yeah, let's hope for a better place or a better data world soon. And it's good that you're campaigning, and I think we need more people to campaign with their feet, as you said, to actually start demanding change. And that's why also this kind of work with just spreading the messages is very, very important.
Mm-hmm. So. Well, I feel like right now the people who are demanding change first have now been artists. The rise of NFTs being the most popular new technology around the world is data ownership activism. It's artists saying, hey, I own my digital content. Just because I upload it to Facebook doesn't mean it's yours. Yep. It's mine, and I spent my time and my expertise creating this content. Whether you're, a digital artist or a musician, whatever it happens to be, throughout the past few decades, if you upload that to the internet, all of a sudden it's gone. It's not yours. But now with NFTs, you actually upload something to the internet, and it has rights ascribed to it. It's encrypted with rights around it. So who owns those commercial rights, who actually owns the piece, whatever it happens to be, and you can transfer it. And all of those rights and rules and laws around it and your royalties are always attached to it. So the sea change has started with art for data ownership, for blockchain activism, for large scale adoption of these technologies. And, Vesa was one of the earliest adopters of that. And now you're seeing companies all around the world that are starting to say NFTs are the biggest part of our business model now.
And it happens so fast. It's crazy. But because this is just the thing, and I suppose part of the evolution that will be this room as well, that the next one we're going to build is going to be a fully digital 360 in screens and make the art into motion. Portal. Yeah, a true portal, and that's because in the majority of people's minds now, because we've had this sort of fiat art period for a while, where it's actually fascinating how much when Richard Nixon took out the gold standard from underneath the dollar, that's when Andy Warhol came into prominence with his literal factory and the kind of certain thing that art has only been able to be sort of fancy things for the rich or political propaganda for the most part. Like intellectually, that's sort of been the narrow bandwidth. And on top of that, there's something called insult art that started with this Piss Christ piece in the 80s. And like the banana on the wall in Miami, that's what most people sort of associate art with now, is this sort of thing that just insults you to the point of, I can't believe that this is real. And then, selling the sort of name of art down the line. And I think on our part and what this project is, and I suppose my sort of general thing altogether, is to return some of the functionality of art to our day-to-day lives, where you can feel that it's doing something useful and it deserves a place in society, that it's doing something to open up hearts and minds and show visions of where we could be going towards. And this is the thing where we really meet.
That's a wonderful segue to ask, what have you been doing? You too.
So, when we were introduced at the beginning of last summer, we started scheming around how we would be able to take an artistic experience out to the world that actually had people understand what data protection, data ownership, blockchain technologies, what those are, and find a way through my story, through my understanding of, I was so excited about all of these technologies, and I got swept up into a company where I thought that they were doing amazing things, and then became a whistleblower, and through that, an activist for blockchain technology and advanced forms of encryption and ways to actually take back control of your digital life. And how could we explain that to people in a way that was, artistic and immersive and emotional and creative and for the past year and a half, when Vesa has not been allowed into America and I've not been allowed into Finland, this has taken like so much evolution and so many iterations of,
and the Dubai that didn't work out.
Yeah. And we found out once that Dubai was the only place that both of us were allowed into in the world. So we almost produced this project in Dubai. But, a year and a half later, we're finally here in the studio. And through this past year and a half of trying to figure out what we are bringing to the world, our goal is really to be able to have this immersive experience that can be taken to museums, art galleries, conferences, exhibitions, where you not only have physical art, but you have NFT art and an AR, VR experience where you are seeing this entire kind of revolution of coming from exploitative traditional technologies and like being so vulnerable and being taken advantage of, and like us needing to protect our future, and therefore kind of transitioning into these empowering technologies and being able to kind of fight off the the legacy technologists, the data mongers, whatever you want to call it. And I don't want to give too much away by being more descriptive.
Yeah, fair enough.
But that whole process of us transitioning from legacy into the future of what empowerment in our digital lives actually looks like. Maybe you want to expand on that.
Yeah, so I'll just talk about the one thing, because we've already made it part public. Is one art piece is called Cookie Monster,
Okay.
and it's this basically, because what I love about this whole conversation as well is that there's nuance here. It's not black and white, and like you say, that there's the artwork is going to start off, as far as we now know, that it's going to be like in this sort of spacesuit, silver type of laser guns or whatever. It's like, do you accept cookies is the big question, and Brittany's going to have these laser guns and how to
I see.
sort of shoot them up. So we start from there, and then it starts the conversation and leads somewhere, and maybe artistically sometimes you have to make things a little bit more black and white as they are. That leads into the conversation, but you can at least, because right now the situation is that most people don't feel what they're actually consenting to when they accept the cookies. Sure. So if you do an artistic expression that is the very counter to that, then at least it balances it maybe to some other thing that leads to.
I really look forward to seeing
Sounds fun.
art piece or whatever form it's going to take. Yeah, for sure. But thanks a bunch to both of you for joining.
Are we done?
Yeah, we are.
Oh,
Unfortunately,
no.
there's
This
a
has
lot of
been
art to be
great fun,
created, so
great
I
fun.
think we need to
Thank you so much.
to let Brittany and Vesa continue. So thanks so much for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for the opportunity for a brilliant conversation this morning.
Thanks.
What a great start for the day. Thank you.
Thanks. And thanks everyone who tuned in. See you in the next one. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Stay safe.